The rain hammered the tin roof of the auction barn, turning every drop into a steady beat that filled the shadowed room. Weathered men, faces carved by work and wind, leaned on the rough wooden rail and watched the last horses move through the ring. In the middle of the arena, standing on wet straw, stood a chestnut horse with a dull coat and heavy eyes. Ribs showed beneath loose skin, and a tangled mane fell lifeless down his neck. He looked as if he belonged to another era, an animal left behind by a world that prized speed and pedigrees over survival. The auctioneer, a thin man with a patchy mustache named Virgil Henshaw, rapped his gavel on the podium and offered the horse without much energy. An unregistered animal, old, no known bloodlines starting at $50. Silence fell. The buyers present wanted strong bloodlines, promising foals, animals that could win races or fetch a high price, not a creature that struggled to hold his head up. Off to the side, under a shadowed beam, a man with a battered hat and a lined face watched with a thoughtful expression, rubbing his grey beard. Ambrose Callaway was a stubborn farmer who had seen horses and oxen treated as tools and then discarded when they no longer paid their way. He breathed out slowly, hesitated, and then raised his hand for the 50. A few chuckles spread through the crowd, Ambrose and his habit of taking in cast-offs, but he ignored them. The gavel came down, sold to Mr. Callaway. Ambrose could not put his finger on why he bid. Maybe it was pity, maybe simple instinct, but something about the horse felt like a voice no one else could hear. He loaded the animal into his rusty trailer and drove away, unaware that taking the horse home would pull a buried secret up to the surface and set off a chain of events that would overturn the quiet life on his farm. The old truck rattled along the dirt road, headlights cutting through low fog while the horse shifted inside the trailer, hooves clinking against metal. Ambrose gripped the steering wheel with one hand, his other resting on the bench's worn leather. The auction's smell and the horse's hollow-eyed look sat heavy on his thoughts. Money was tight, the barns laned and splintered, the fences needed repair, and there was no good reason to take on another mouth to feed. Yet those eyes, the controlled way the horse moved despite exhaustion, struck something deep in Ambrose. By the time the rain eased to a drizzle, the old gate creaked as he drove through and the mud stuck to his boots. He backed the trailer into the yard, shut off the engine, and took a breath of damp earth and hay. The farm held its usual quiet, an owl somewhere in the trees and the whisper of wind through the leaves. Ambrose unlatched the trailer and stepped back. The horse stood, ears turning toward the sounds with slow, heavy breath. He descended the ramp with a reluctant step, pausing as if reading the space around him. Farm lights threw a golden wash over the paddock, revealing closer details. Old scars on the legs, a faded white stripe down the forehead, ribs that showed too plainly. Yet every move carried purpose, a sort of measured strength that did not match the coat's neglect. Ambrose sighed and patted the animal's neck. The horse flinched not in fear but with an odd, practiced anticipation, as if trained to brace for a touch or a command. Leading him into the barn and into a quiet stall, Ambrose filled a bucket with fresh water. The horse drank with care, taking measured sips and stepping back, calm and controlled rather than frantic. Ambrose studied him, a question hanging in the still air, and when he leaned closer he noticed a mark half hidden by dried mud on the horse's side. It was a brand, old and partially covered, but unmistakable when cleaned. Ambrose's fingers brushed away grime to reveal a weathered circle with an arrow through it. The sight of it tightened something in his chest. That mark was Holston Stables' brand, one of the most respected names in racing, a place where champions were bred and sold for more than many farms were worth. How had a Holston horse come to be half-starved and sold for $50 at a backwards auction? The question crawled up his spine. Ambrose dug through a dusty tack room drawer until he found brittle papers and an old photograph of a younger version of the very horse now in his stall, sleeker, muscles defined, eyes bright with a champion's fire. Beneath it, printed in neat type, the name, Waymaker, sired by Iron Legacy, once owned by Holston Stables. Waymaker had been a legend 5 years prior, called a horse with heart, known for charging from behind and defying long odds. Then abruptly he vanished. Rumors swirled back then, an injury, a scandal, allegations that never took hold. But Ambrose stared from the photograph to the frail creature in his stall and felt a chill. Someone had attempted to scrub this horse from history. He had been hidden, not merely abandoned. Ambrose sat with the old catalogue at his kitchen table, a lamp spilling yellow light over the open pages, the photo staring up as though demanding answers. He had to learn what had happened. The next call went to one person who might remember the way the racing world smelled and moved: Levi Grayson, once a top trainer who had quarreled with Holston and walked away. Levi answered in a gruff voice that still carried the iron of the track, suspicious at first, then quiet when Ambrose described the brand and the name. Levi's response was short and sharp: "Come to the farm now." The following morning, a battered black pickup climbed Ambrose's long driveway. Levi stepped down, tall and tense. Time had roughed him. Grey threaded his hair and left lines at his eyes, but those were the marks of someone who had known the life of horses and speed, and the people who wanted both controlled. He walked to the barn and paused in front of Waymaker's stall. For a long moment he simply looked, the old trainer's eyes taking in how the horse held himself. "Son of a," he murmured, "it really is him." Ambrose demanded answers. Levi's face folded in on itself. Waymaker had not simply been lost, he had been made to disappear. If he was still alive, Holston would want him gone. Ambrose felt fear, sharp and hot, not only for the horse but for the farm, for everything quiet and safe in his life. Levi talked quietly then, a voice like gravel, and suggested that Holston Stables had power and pockets deep enough to bury people and stories alike. 5 years ago, just ahead of the Belmont Stakes, Waymaker had vanished from the stable. Some had said injury, others a failed test, but Levi believed something else. The horse had seen something he should not have. Ambrose scoffed at the idea at first, but the horse's steady, alert bearing put a weight behind Levi's words. They had no time for more speculation. If Holston's people wanted the horse back, they would not stop at a simple request. They would come with force. The danger arrived faster than either man expected. Headlights crawled up the lane and a black SUV slowed to a stop near the porch. 2 men in clean clothes stepped out, their presence at odds with the farm's greasy ratio of work over polish. The taller one wore a black wool coat and an air of control. The shorter, wiry man moved with a quick, predatory alertness. The taller man introduced himself as Richard Holston, displaying a badge as if ownership was synonymous with law. He spoke in a soft, smooth voice that did not need to be raised to take charge. Holston explained that a prized horse had gone missing years ago and suggested Ambrose might have him now. He offered to buy the animal back, a polite facade over a cold demand. Levi's warning breathed in the air like a threat. Holston's smile never quite reached his eyes. He left with a quiet reminder: some things are better left buried. The SUV's taillights disappeared, and the night came back, but Ambrose's resolve had shifted into a hard core. He was not about to hand over Waymaker to any man who hinted at violence or lies. Holston's warning made one thing clear: this would not end with money and polite words. Ambrose and Levi set to work. The next morning they searched old reports and tracking notes, digging through a virtual trail that had been scrubbed clean. Most articles from 5 years before said little more than that a champion was gone. No direct leaks from Holston ever surfaced, no injury report, no explanation for a multi-million-dollar horse vanishing without trace. Old rumors lay in comment threads like burnt-out embers, but Levi and Ambrose wanted solid proof. A faint, forgotten post led them to a grainy blog entry from an ex-stable hand who claimed to have overheard a heated argument the night Waymaker disappeared. Whispers of a deal gone wrong and talk of someone paying the price. The final chilling line suggested murder. The writer believed someone died that night and that Waymaker's disappearance had been part of the cover-up. If true, Holston had hidden more than a horse, and the possibility of a body of a crime changed the stakes completely. As the house felt smaller and colder with this thought, a knock sounded at the door. Ambrose peered out to find a young woman on the porch, jacket damp with mist and a look of something between fear and resolve. She introduced herself as Claire Lawson and said the name of her father with a weight behind it. Ray Lawson had worked at Holston for years and then vanished the same night Waymaker did. Holston told the family it was an accident, a fall from a hayloft after drinking, but Claire insisted he did not drink and never fell. She placed a small flash drive on the table, trembling, and said her father had hidden that drive before he disappeared. The file contained security footage from the night in question, Holston arguing with Ray, the altercation that followed, and something that proved change was not merely a rumor. Ambrose and Levi stared at the drive as if it were a lit match in a dry field, valuable enough to burn everything down. Before they could do anything, the sound of tires on gravel warned them someone else had tracked Claire to the farm. A black SUV crawled to a stop, a blow from fate making the room crack with sudden danger. Someone fired through the front window, glass spraying across the kitchen. Levi moved on instinct, grabbing Claire and yelling to Ambrose to run for the barn. The trio bolted toward the horses as shots cracked and dark men raced across the yard. Waymaker stood in his stall as if he had waited his whole life for this moment. There was no saddle, no time for a careful mounting, only the urgent need to get to safety. Ambrose vaulted onto the horse's back, Claire tumbled up behind him, and Levi swung into the saddle of another mount. The chase was on, tires churned mud, headlights stabbed through rain-slick night. Waymaker, though aged and scarred, exploded forward with the kind of power that had once made him a champion. Hooves pounded the earth in a rhythm that matched the heartbeats of fleeing men and horses alike. The pursuers, Holston's men, raced after them in two SUVs, guns ready. Ahead loomed a railway bridge, long unused, its planks rotten, rails rusted, a dangerous route that promised escape on one side and disaster on the other. It was the only way that might scatter their tail and ruin the vehicles behind them. Waymaker ran for the bridge as if he remembered every race and every jump, trusting old instincts. The wooden planks bit into his hooves as the bridge groaned and flexed, and the pursuers' SUVs tried to follow. Tires screeched, and a section of the bridge split like old paper, shuddering and giving way. One massive portion shattered into the river below in a roar of timber and metal. Holston's men skidded to a halt, trapped on the broken span, their vehicles useless with a gap in the middle. Ambrose eased Waymaker to a stop on the safe side, chest pounding, hands damp on the horse's neck. Levi's breath drew heavy beside them, and Claire, shaking, clung to Ambrose and the animal that had carried them through the worst minutes of their lives. Down below, spray flew and the river swallowed the collapsing pieces, taking with it the men's immediate pursuit. For a while afterward, only the sound of breathing and the river's rush filled the space. They had escaped, but the threat had not disappeared. Holston was not finished, and now the farm, the flash drive, and their lives were tied to a secret that would not stay hidden. Waymaker stood tall, chest heaving, eyes watchful and steady. The horse that had once been declared gone seemed to carry a calm knowledge. He had been found, and in finding him, a truth had surfaced that some known figures had tried mightily to bury. Ambrose looked down at the horse, and for the first time since he had brought him home, felt a sense of kinship and purpose. There would be danger ahead, more questions, more threats, but whatever lay in the footage and whatever ghosts Holston had tried to hide would have to be faced. The quiet farm would no longer be a refuge from the world's hard angles, it would become a place of reckoning. Waymaker, once forgotten and dragged to the edge of ruin, had shown that strength can survive neglect, and that truth, like a stubborn animal, can be brought back into the light. The rain that had fallen earlier had washed away only the surface dust. deeper stains remained, and Ambrose and his unlikely alliance of an old trainer and a brave young woman now held proof that could undo the comfortable lies of a powerful stable. The journey ahead would be dangerous, full of dark men and whispered threats, but keeping the horse and protecting Claire's evidence meant fighting for more than an animal. It meant standing up to a kind of cruelty that wasted lives to protect reputations. In the cold, damp stillness after the collapse of the bridge, the three of them waited and planned, listening to the distant sound of engines fade into the dark. Waymaker stood quietly, a living link between a past of glory and a present that demanded justice. Ambrose ran fingertips slowly along the horse's battered flank and found, under mud and soreness, the unbroken courage of a competitor who never stopped believing. Somewhere in the night, Holston's warnings and the weight of money and influence mattered less than this moment. A chance to set right what had gone wrong. There would be investigations, confrontations, and danger yet, but the old farm had found its center again, not in bank accounts or prizes, but in a stubborn refusal to let what was hidden stay hidden. Hold tight, move smart, and follow the truth, the three agreed without speaking the words. The horse that had been written off as dead to the world would be the path to uncovering a terrible secret. It would take cunning, courage, and help from unexpected places, but in the end the farm's quiet life might be restored with a new kind of pride. The knowledge that somewhere between rusted fences and weathered beams, justice had begun to find company. If this story stirred something in the chest, if the idea of a forgotten champion rising again felt like a spark, then be part of the next chapter. Subscribe to follow how the truth comes to light, tap like to keep these stories alive, and share this tale so others can join the fight for what was nearly buried.